Hi, and welcome to a special bonus episode of Higher Ed. I'm Luda Saharov. Higher Ed was conceived as an outlet for Jewish students on campuses across the country, and we've been proud to feature their voices over the past few months. Today, however, we're going to shift things a little and talk to someone in a key leadership role about how they address antisemitism on their campus. In March, we were fortunate enough to sit down with Chancellor Andrew Martin of Washington University at the Never Is Now Summit in New York. Washington University, or WashU, is a private university in St. Louis with a sizable population of Jewish students. Through his leadership, Martin was able to avoid so many of the conflicts that occurred on other campuses across the U.S. after October 7th. Here's my conversation with Chancellor Martin. Today, we're at Never Is Now at the Javits Center with 4,000 people here for the largest gathering on anti-Semitism and hate in the world. And we have the really, really special opportunity to welcome Chancellor Martin to the Higher Ed podcast. I know that many students would be thrilled for the opportunity to sit down with the university chancellor at a time like this. And so I'm really honored. You've been a leader at multiple institutions. Can you tell me in a few sentences what makes WashU unique in your eyes?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for this invitation. I'm really pleased to be able to sit down with you today and have this conversation. I think the thing that makes Washington University truly unique is that we're a community that is deeply committed to the idea of collaboration. That's true among our students, it's true among our faculty, and there's a real intentionality focused on lifting everyone up so that everyone can achieve their full potential. Lots of universities talk about collaboration, but I tell you, when you visit WashU, you're able to spend time with our students, spend time with our faculty. It feels palpably different than many other university communities.
It's definitely a university I'm hoping to visit in the near future.
You should come visit us anytime.
Yes, I would love to. So I was excited to learn that your area of expertise, your academic background, is actually in free speech. And what a unique position to be in, to be university president, having this background. So I know that universities often strive for institutional neutrality on political and global issues. How do you personally approach that principle, especially in moments of crisis like the start of the Hamas and Israel war on October 7th?
It's a great question. I've been teaching a course called Free Speech on Campus since I came to WashU in 2019 as chancellor. In fact, I just taught 40 or so undergraduate students this weekend, which was a really terrific experience. For us, and I think true for every academic institution, free speech is sacrosanct. I mean, it really forms the foundation for everything that we do. The reason why it's so important is that for us to explore any issue, but particularly controversial issues, it's really important for every idea to get out on the table. Even ideas that one would find repugnant or ideas that one would disagree with vehemently. There is, though, a subtlety, and the subtlety is that while freedom of expression is of paramount importance, it's also important that we approach that in a serious, dignified, civil fashion, right? And that's the thing that really unwound on many college campuses over the last 18 months. And not only did that create environments where some students didn't feel welcome, didn't feel that they could be part of the community, but it also meant that important issues of the day got distilled down into little sound bites and yelling at one another as opposed to deep substantive conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I can really appreciate that you acknowledge that a lot of the speech that was being used on campus made certain communities, like the Jewish community, actually feel unwelcome. How do you feel universities can do their best in making sure that speech is ensured for all sides, even when one side isn't maybe the most popular in the university's culture?
I think it's actually pretty easy. You need to be clear about what your institutional values are. You need to develop policies that are consistent with those institutional values, and then you need to enforce them. And if you're able to do that, and you're intentional on bringing different communities to the table and to bring different communities together, I think you can create an environment where all different groups can feel welcome. I can say that, I'm really proud of our student affairs leadership at WashU, the way in which they work with student groups of all different types to ensure that every group, including our Jewish students, are able to express themselves and be an important part of our community.
Without the enforcement, we have no way of knowing if the university's rules will be upheld if we will be kept safe. And so I appreciate you acknowledging that. Some people argue that campus anti-Semitism is an issue of academic freedom, but some people say there's a moral crisis. We can remember times in the past where universities have taken moral stances on very, very egregious things such as racism and hate, which we support, but we haven't seen this kind of moral stance from all universities when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes for support of terrorism. Where do you see the line between free speech and hate speech on campus?
Well, I think it's a really complicated question because the courts in the United States have never defined what hate speech actually is. There's certain categories of speech, harassment, true threats, and the like, that aren't constitutionally protected and certainly not welcome on our campus or any other campus. The distinction is subtle in certain ways. One of the things that I've consistently spoken about on our campus, not just with regard to anti-Semitism, but I've been explicit about talking about anti-Semitism and it having no place on our campuses for years, is something that I talk about quite regularly, is we have to talk about our institutional values. It shouldn't be difficult for a university president to stand up in front of a community and say, hate is not welcome here. And that's true. It's certainly true for anti-Semitism. It would be true for black racism or anything else. And you raise an important point about double standards. One needs to have a set of principles. The overarching principle is that hate has no place on our campuses, and then everything else follows from that.
Well, first of all, I want to pause and say thank you for your leadership and thank you for your strong stance on this. I did connect with some Jewish students on your campus before this interview, and they were grateful, incredibly grateful. It does make a difference. These words that you say are powerful.
Thank you.
So I gave you a little background on myself. I was a student activist. So I was working in the president's office, and I understood how the institution worked. I understood the official processes, the official way to put complaints. And I and students across the country, we became very frustrated because we started to feel like the students who were breaking the rules, who were setting up in campus, vandalizing campus, saying hateful things and slurs, were almost rewarded by being offered a conversation, being offered a seat at the table with the administration, whereas we intentionally chose to follow the rules, use the proper channels, often felt like we got the shorter end of the stick. We weren't heard. But I really wanted to take this opportunity to ask your opinion. What would you recommend Jewish students do to help stand up for their own safety, to actually be heard by their university? Should they start a petition? Should they do an encampment, blockade a building? Help me understand what we should be doing to get a meaningful response from our universities. It's
a great question. And before I answer it, I do want to talk a little bit about the WashU experience. We had a number of protests on our campus, beginning in October of 2023. And it wasn't until about 6 or 7 months before those protests got out of hand. And when we had a set of individuals, many of which were unaffiliated with the university, to try to set up an encampment on our campus, we said no. We had 100 folks arrested. It was the last thing that I wanted to do, but it was important in order to preserve the community so our students could get through finals and then be able to celebrate their graduation in person. When I talk to student activists, for example, I don't do demands. If I have a group of students who bring me a demand letter, I said, that's very nice. And it goes in the circular file. Because you demand something, because you're provocative, I actually don't provide you a seat at the table. And I know that has frustrated our student activists over time at WashU. I think the most effective thing for student activism is to focus initially on the problem. What's happening at the university where I'm not being served well? And that could be safety and security. It could be about lousy food. It could be about the curriculum, whatever. And then work to build relationships with the people at the university who have responsibility for those areas. Again, I can't speak to how this works at other universities, but at WashU, my leadership team loves engaging with students about issues. Now, if you come with here's the problem, here's the solution, and we demand that you do it, we're going to mostly ignore that. Right? But if you come and say, look, we'd like to work with you on this particular problem. Let's understand what's feasible, what's not feasible, on what time scale. We can get a lot done. And that's really worked with our students on some really important issues. We have a great student affairs team who manage many, many different things, including the relationship with our faith communities at WashU. But those are individuals who are student-focused, and can really help students translate how the university works and help provide some guidance. I think the other thing is to advocate with the administrative leadership at the highest level. If you can get a conversation with the president or chancellor, do it. If not, talk to the provost. If not, talk to the deans, because they play a particularly important role in university leadership.
From my experience, I think that's made the most impact is speaking to university leadership. In the wake of the October 7th attacks, many Jewish students, I'm sure at WashU and across the country, have spoken about feeling deeply traumatized, isolated, and as we talked about, unsafe on campus. They've experienced hostility from their peers, and others have struggled with a lack of institutional recognition of their pain. Do you think you have been successful in keeping students safe on campus?
Yes, I think I have. After October 7th, we did a lot of intentional work with our community. Initially that day, making sure that the one student that we knew was in Israel was safe, and we were able to get her returned back to her program in Barcelona. But then to begin to work and reach out to students who we knew had connections with Israel, working with our partners at Hillel and Chabad, to begin to have those conversations. It turned out that was our fall break weekend. So most of our students didn't return to the campus until that Tuesday. But we began very proactively, very personally reaching out. Not issuing a bunch of statements and everything else, although I certainly commented on the horrific terrorist attacks and showing, my remorse for everyone who was affected by the situation. But we began very quickly interacting with those communities. I can tell you that 2 weeks after the attacks was Parents' Weekend. We had many parents from around the country who were very worried. They were seeing the national news and were expecting to see what they were seeing on the national news playing out. And that was not the experience at WashU. And I think that our students, including our Jewish students, really were able to continue to lean into their identity and to rely on one another in a truly traumatic moment.
I want to circle back to you talking about the removal of the encampment and the decision to bring in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Looking back and reflecting on that, do you think that was the right decision? Do you have any regrets around that? And do you think that's what needed to be done to enforce your university's policies?
Absolutely. Look, I think the important thing is we never had an encampment. We made it very clear that folks could protest and express their views, and they did so robustly. But our policies were clear that if you were to try to set up an encampment, we weren't going to allow that to happen. As opposed to letting it set up and then trying to figure out what to do wherever. We decided ex ante that was how we were going to approach this. And we made that decision because that was the best thing for all of our students. It was the best thing for our entire community. And one of the regrets that I have is we might not have communicated that clearly to as many of audiences as we would have liked. One of the things that we've learned is that younger folks tend to get their information in different ways than us older folks. Email may not be
very nicely.
Email may not be the most effective means to communicate with a 19 or 20-year-old.
Yes.
And that's something that we've really been working on and making sure that there's absolute clarity about what our policies are. But we made the determination that freedom of expression, advocating your views, marching around the campus, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to set up an encampment which takes space away from others, that just was not acceptable. And that's the line that we drew.
I feel that so strongly. I was sending our university administration our highlighted policies, and they're just shrugging their shoulders. And I'm like, what's the point of a policy if you're not going to enforce it? So to hear you say that, very validating, and your students are lucky to have a chancellor that has that value of enforcing policies. I want to have some of your personal perspective, as a chancellor and as a human. Looking back at the past over a year since October 7th, what was the hardest moment for you as a university chancellor? Yeah,
the hardest moment for us, so it was April 27th, was when we had the big protest on the east end of our campus. We had 100 individuals removed. This was during the reading period right before final exams. The most difficult thing was how do we navigate the 2 weeks between that protest and our graduation? And to navigate that, one of our unique challenges is that much of the activism that was happening on our campus didn't involve students. 3/4 of the people who were arrested on our campus weren't affiliated with the university.
Wow.
And we have an open campus, and so we were navigating that. How are we going to have commencement? How are we going to think about safety and security? We certainly knew that there were going to be protests. We didn't want those protests to take away the joy from our students and their families who had invested so much time at WashU, one of the decisions we had to make is we put this big, tall, ugly fence around the entire east end of our campus. We're an open campus. It was ugly. Forest Park is the front door of our campus, and we separated ourselves from Forest Park and symbolically separated ourselves from St. Louis. All of those decisions, from the big ones to the small ones, about how we were going to navigate, that was an incredibly, incredibly trying time for me personally, for our entire leadership team, and with lots of noise and hoopla and everything else. At the end of the day, we executed a great commencement for our students. And that's something that we were really proud of, and I know that we were all very happy to be able to exhale that Monday evening once commencement was over.
Well, that's really nice, because I know as a class of 2024 kid who started in COVID, ended during an encampment, I know that was probably so special for your students. Speaking of noise and hoopla,
yes,
did you feel pressure from competing interests? How did you balance competing interests, and how do you personally deal with backlash? Like, I don't think I could ever be a university president, because you can never make everyone happy. People will always be upset. How do you personally deal with that?
No leader can make everybody happy all the time. And so you've got to make the right decisions, and you have to deal with the consequences. During last academic year, there were days that I was getting 10, 20,000 emails a day from around the country about all the horrible things that were happening at Washington University, or the great things that were happening at Washington University. And of course, hearing from many of my colleagues on the campus, from alumni, from our students, and everything else. That is not easy, right? It's just not easy when you are sort of a constant every move that you make, there's criticism, and that criticism is loud, and at times that criticism is cruel. At the same time, the way that I lead by focusing on our mission. We do three things at WashU. We educate our students, we do research, and we also have a great academic medical center and provide patient care to hundreds of thousands of people in St. Louis. I think it drives my leadership team nuts, but when we're dealing with a gnarly problem, the question is always, what's the best thing for our mission? For our educational mission, what's the best thing for our students? And we're going to think it through, and we're going to make a decision. And so long as we've made a decision in good faith, knowing it was the right thing for our educational mission, the right thing for what we're doing in research, I'm happy to take the heat. It's sort of my job to take the heat. And during the events of last academic year, our leadership team really gelled in important ways, focused on all the different things that we do, from safety and security to interfacing with faith communities, for how our faculty and staff organize themselves, that we really were able to pull together in a mission-focused way.
And as a leader and someone who thinks about leadership, looking back on the last year, what would you have done differently if you had the chance to relive the past year?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that we would have done differently, and in fact we began doing differently coming into this academic year, has to do with the clarity of what our policies are. I mean, simple things like making sure that all your policies are at a single place, not spread over a number of campus websites, to be able to communicate in multiple modalities, not just through email, to ensure that our expectations are clear. I think there were opportunities for us to have done that better last academic year. We're always continuously learning, or at least trying to.
I appreciate that you can acknowledge areas for growth. So, Chancellor Martin, I was really pleased to learn that you played a central role in launching your university's Center for Empirical Research in the Law. Mm-hmm. And students were telling me that they're actually required to take a quantitative methods class, which I will tell you was, even as someone who hates math, the best thing I did for myself in college is learn how to understand data and statistics, because it's everything, and it's now everything.
It's very important.
In my job at ADL.
Very important.
So as you may have seen, ADL's Campus Antisemitism Report Card came out today.
Yes. This
morning. And it provides universities with tangible, data-driven insights to improve their responses to anti-Semitism. And encouragingly, 45% of schools evaluated in the report card improved their rating. So there's the fun data point for you after receiving their initial grade, demonstrating that data can drive real change. So as someone who deeply values empirical research, how has ADL's report card and similar data sources helped your university move in the right direction? And what impact have you seen in using these tools to create meaningful institutional change?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm really proud of is how seriously we took the effort that ADL led last academic year for the first report card, we got this data request. It's in the middle of a very complicated time in our university's history. But we knew that our institutional values, particularly around inclusion, were totally aligned with the ADL. And so we really leaned into the exercise, and that was really helpful for us. I mean, we discovered things that we were doing that at least the chancellor didn't know about. And for us to be able to pull all of those things together and sort of look at what we're doing in totality, finding some holes about some things that we could be doing differently or doing better, I think was a really valuable project for us.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that it was a productive and useful tool to you. And I'm also very grateful that you guys engaged in the process, because the report card wouldn't be the success it is. It wouldn't be meaningful unless universities engaged with it and found it helpful, despite it being a challenging time. So thank you for doing that.
And lots and lots and lots of questions.
Lots and lots and lots of questions, but that's how we make good data, as you know, from your background.
Correct.
So I want to talk about looking forward. How do you think this experience has changed you as a leader and even as a person, or if it has at all?
So I think it has in two ways. I mean, first, it really doesn't matter what the particular episode is, but when you as a leader are dealing with a really complicated, high-dimensional problem with lots of emotion and a lot of disagreement, that it does help and sharpen your focus. And I think for me and the leadership team at WashU, what we've been living through has allowed us to work more effectively as a team and also to be able to really focus on what's most important and sort of deal with the consequences. I think for me personally, I'm not the most emotive person in the world. And last year in particular, I was called on over and over and over again, not to be this super rational, linear, academic leader, but to just be a human in fellowship. In this case, with students and with alumni and with parents. That's not a modality that is inherent in me. It's something that I'm not super comfortable with, but I also recognize how important that was for various members of my community in various points in time, and was really intentional in leaning into that discomfort.
Students often feel very disconnected from their administrations, from university presidents, and sometimes we forget that you all are humans too. You go through real human emotions and challenges and conflicts. And so I know this is a more solemn question, but what was your darkest day as university chancellor? And how did you personally deal with that outside of your work?
My most difficult day in the last year and a half was late last spring, when one of our undergraduate students passed away. She had just gotten home from college, had a very significant food allergy, passed away, and I happened to be on the East Coast, so I was able to travel to her funeral and burial and then the family Shiva thereafter, and it was heartbreaking. During that time, I had some of the members of my leadership team who knew the student personally with me, which was very helpful, and I came home that night and gave my wife and my daughter a big hug, and really put everything in perspective.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable. I know
Sure.
that's not easy for
That's
you.
not my jam.
It's not your jam, but we're all in this together. This is a safe space. I think so many university presidents and chancellors can learn a few lessons from you. Not everyone has been able to handle this with such moral clarity and with such an ability to be able to accept backlash, but to stick so firmly to your university's mission and to your values. So if you had the opportunity to send one message to every university president or chancellor across the country about handling these issues, what would it be?
The one thing that I would say, and this is group agnostic, this would be equally true for our rural first-generation students. It's true for our Black students, true for our Catholic students and our Jewish students and our Muslim students. It is really important as a leader to do whatever you can to build personal connections with as many of those groups that live on your campus as possible. And I'll say that that's really hard to do. I mean, university presidents, our schedules are absolutely impossible. And sometimes it has to be done not by the president or chancellor personally, but by members of their team. But to build those relationships early on are important, and it's particularly important because you never know what next issue is going to present itself. I was invited many times when I came back to WashU. I've been on the faculty for many, many years and left the University of Michigan for a bit and came back I was transitioning in the fall of 2018. I began in January of 2019. I was regularly invited, both to Hillel and Chabad and also to the Catholic Student Center and other meetings as well. And I would show up just to get to know people and for me personally to learn about faith traditions that were not my own. And those relationships were so important as we came together as a community to navigate what we had to deal with last year.
What role has the Jewish community played in helping you navigate this post-October 7th? How have you leaned on them to navigate this?
I mean, this is a community that has stepped up to be helpful in so many ways. Both the leadership of both our Chabad and Hillel have been great partners. We don't always agree on things all the time. That's a good thing. And we're able to argue about it, and that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, we're always focused on what's best for our students. The St. Louis Jewish community, which is a group that we have good relationships with, but after October 7th really made sure that we were closely aligned because they had very significant concerns about what was happening on other university campuses. They wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening at WashU. And we have 60,000 members of the Jewish community in St. Louis. It's quite a significant part of the St. Louis population. And then there are some of the national organizations. I mean, AJC, the ADL, and others provided resources and resources that we leaned on. We did some great training for my leadership team, and then we broadened it out. If I had a question about what's the right way to think about this, I could pick up the phone. And whether that's calling somebody on the campus, whether it's calling someone from the St. Louis Jewish Federation or a national resource was really valuable and really helpful to us.
I work in the regional office now, and we are excited and we're happy and grateful when universities choose to reach out to us for support because we're ready and we have the resources. A big audience of this podcast, and I think the people who may be most distressed in this whole situation are parents. I have a younger sister who is currently a senior in high school. She's considering universities. And one, what do you think students should look for in universities to know that they will be kept safe? And two, could you just speak directly to parents and the concerns and the anxieties they're having about this time and what's going on campus?
Sure. I mean, it's a very fraught moment on many college campuses around the country. And, we all read about the situations that are happening in the headlines, but actually, the news is only focused on a small number of institutions. And so when you're considering what institution to entrust with your child, it's a very important decision. I mean, my daughter is 16 and a half. As a sophomore in high school, and so we're just beginning that process itself. Look, I mean, the advice that I'd give parents is twofold. One, the best predictor of future success is past behavior, right? And so to really look carefully at what's happened on these campuses over these last few years, I think that's going to tell you a lot about what the future is likely to look like. Certainly institutions can change. We all can do better, but I think looking at that record is important. And I think the most important resource for information, is not sitting down with a university president or a dean of admissions, is talking to current students, finding a way to sit down with current students and say, look, what is it like on this campus? I'm not Jewish, and neither is my daughter. But if I were the parents of a Jewish student today, I would send my kid to meet with Jewish students and say, what is it like for you on this campus? Is this a campus where I can lean into my religious identity, where I can celebrate with my peers and colleagues? And do you feel supported by the institution? Current students are the ones who are going to be able to answer that question honestly, without spin, I think.
Wonderful advice. And I will pass that along to my mom and sister. Even though she's the third, I would say it didn't get easier making that big decision. And now more than ever, it's so challenging just balancing what you want to be as a student in your academic aspirations with this unnecessary and unfortunate reality that not every campus will be welcome, and not every Jewish student can handle that. Some can and some can't, and that's a personal decision you have to make. I want to ask a question about accountability of universities. We have an administration currently that really is taking this seriously and wants to hold universities accountable. I'm really curious, what is a good deterrent from your perspective of universities to not take this seriously? I know you have taken this seriously with enforcing your policies and removing the encampment, but is there a role for accountability, and do you think there's progress on this issue without some sort of serious penalty for university failures and without accountability?
Yeah, so I'd say that there has been some progress. I think that there is properly a great deal of worry, consternation, among elected officials in Washington of what have been playing out and continues to play out on some college campuses. I think the challenge is, how do you translate that vitriolic reaction into action? And I think that there are some real opportunities. Some of those opportunities are going to be sticks, regulation. I mean, every university has obligations under Title VI that I think will become of greater importance in the years to come. I also think that the federal government in particular has some opportunity to provide some carrots, to sort of think about how do you reward institutions that are doing the right thing by their students. If the ultimate goal is to make college universities better for an ever-increasing breadth of students, I think you got to do the carrot thing and the stick thing.
Wow, that's very interesting. I always hear about the stick and the penalties, and to hear from you personally, the carrot element as well, it makes sense. What gives you hope for the future of higher education? What do we all have to look forward to in the next few years?
The thing that gives me hope are our students, right? I mean, if I think 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, you're going to be the ones leading these institutions, not me, right? And I know how thoughtful our students are. I know how resilient they are in incredibly turbulent times. And of course, I'm very bullish on the Washington University community. I mean, that's sort of my job. But I think it's also borne out by what we've been able to accomplish. Even last fall, our Jewish students were comfortable walking around our campus. They were gathering on our quad. They were supported, just like we support all of our students. And I think their experience, was quite different than what many students had around the country.
And what advice would you give to students across the country who are not at WashU? Any words of encouragement, just as someone who is in the higher education space?
First I'd say transfer to WashU. We're always looking for talented students. But the other thing I would say, look, within the community that you're in, students have a responsibility to that community as well, right? And so to lean into those opportunities to lead, work to make your campus, your community a little bit better. I think that that's important. And I know it can be difficult work, but it's also important work.
Again, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and for your honest perspective.
No, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. It's always great to be in conversation about what's happening in higher education, about leadership in general, but most importantly, to talk about our students. That's what we do. Those of us in academic leadership, that's why we've chosen this. And at times you get pretty far away from that aspect of the job, but it's incredibly important. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Higher Ed. Thanks so much for listening. Next week, we'll be taking a break for Passover, but we'll return with a fresh episode on April 24th. To learn more about how to fight anti-Semitism on your campus, go to notoleranceforantisemitism.adl.org. If you or someone you know would like to report a campus anti-Semitism incident, text CALL HELP to 51555 or go to adl.org/call for free legal help. Subscribe to Higher Ed for weekly conversations and stories about Jewish campus life. Please rate and review us wherever you listen, and if you have a story to share, please email us at highered@adl.org. That's CHAIERED@adl.org. We can't wait to hear your story.